In the winter of 1954, on a quiet night in Princeton, a conversation took place that should never have been revealed. A conversation between Albert Einstein, the man who unraveled the secrets of space-time, and a young philosopher about humanity's oldest question: what happens when we die? And the answer that emerged that night challenges everything we've been taught about existence, about consciousness, about who we really are. And what I'm going to reveal in the next few minutes could completely change the way you see death, fear, and the very meaning of your life. Because 93% of people spend their entire lives avoiding this conversation, pretending death doesn't exist, until it knocks on the door. But the 7% who face it head-on, they discover something surprising. Death is not the end we've been made to believe. This is not a story about religion, nor about science in the conventional sense. It's about the territory where both meet and fall silent. About what the greatest thinkers intuit, but rarely express publicly. About truths that cross generations, not because someone proved them in a laboratory, but because they resonate deeply in those who stop to listen. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal 3 fundamental truths about what really happens when you die. 3 discoveries that can completely transform your relationship with existence. But before we get there, you need to understand why this conversation was kept secret for so long. It was February 23rd. The snow gently covered the streets of Princeton, muffling all the sounds of the night. Inside a modest red brick house, the fireplace crackled low while 2 men sat facing each other in time-worn armchairs. Albert Einstein was 75 years old. His disheveled white hair was already a recognizable trademark anywhere in the world. The man who revolutionized physics with the theory of relativity was now in his final months of life. But that night, his eyes carried something different. It wasn't the gleam of the scientist who solves impossible equations. It was the serenity of someone who knows that time is coming to an end and has decided to talk about what really matters. Einstein had made a pact of silence with himself for decades. He would never speak publicly about his most controversial investigations. He would never reveal what he discovered while studying hundreds of cases that official science considered taboo. But that February night, something changed. He was about to break that silence. On the other side, the young philosopher held a pen with trembling hands. He had no recorder, just paper and an attention that bordered on sacred. He wasn't there for a formal interview. He was there because he had asked the right question at the right time to the right man. If you're feeling this now, if this whole setup is pulling you into the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because what comes next goes much deeper than you imagine. Einstein served tea for both of them. The steam rose in slow spirals, drawing temporary shapes in the cold air. He looked directly at the young man and said, in a calm but firm voice, "You asked me if I believe there's something after death, and I'm going to answer you. But first I need you to understand something. The question is already wrong from the start." The philosopher frowned, intrigued. And here's something that 9 out of 10 people never stop to question. The very way we ask the question reveals a false assumption about the nature of time and consciousness. Einstein continued, "When you ask if there's something after death, you're assuming that time works in a linear way. Birth, life, death, beginning, middle, end, as if existence were a straight line that simply terminates. But time isn't that. Time is a useful illusion we created to make sense of human experience." He rose slowly, walked to the window and observed the snow falling under the faint light of the street lamp. "For decades I dedicated my life to understanding space and time. I discovered that they are not absolutes. They curve, stretch, bend, depending on where you are and how you observe. If time can dilate and contract, if it's relative to the observer, then what does that say about death?" The young man wrote quickly, trying to capture every word. "That death is also relative." Einstein returned to his armchair and smiled slightly. "That death is a transition of state, not an end. It's like when water becomes steam. The form changes, but the essence remains. And here's the first fundamental truth I'm going to reveal today. Keep this phrase because it will make much more sense when I close the circle at the end. Consciousness is not born with the body and doesn't die with it. It simply assumes different configurations. But wait, stop everything now. Did you notice what I just said? I didn't speak of soul in the religious sense. I spoke of consciousness, and there's a huge difference between these two concepts. The soul was hijacked by dogmas, wrapped in superstitions, transformed into currency to control masses through fear. But consciousness, that's another story. Consciousness is the observer field that witnesses all experience. It's that in you which is present before any thought, before any emotion. It's the silence that exists between your words, between your breaths. Maybe you're thinking now, but this isn't scientifically proven, right? And here's what few realize. Materialist science cannot prove consciousness because it's trying to use consciousness to prove consciousness. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The tool and the object of study are the same thing. The young man stopped writing for an instant. He closed his eyes, trying to feel what Einstein was describing, and for 3 seconds there was only silence in the room. The crackling of the fireplace, the breathing of both, and something more. A presence that had no form, but was undeniably there. When he opened his eyes, Einstein was observing him attentively. Did you feel it? That which observed the silence was not in the silence, it was witnessing the silence. That witness, that silent observer, is consciousness, and it doesn't need the body to exist. This is the first truth I want you to take from here today. And now comes the most important part of everything we're going to talk about. Because what I'm going to reveal now explains why this conversation was kept secret for so long. The philosopher hesitated before asking, "But how can you be so certain of this?" Einstein took a deep breath. It's not certainty in the conventional scientific sense, but I have something few people know about. For decades, I investigated cases I never mentioned publicly, documents I kept in secret, testimonies I personally validated. And throughout these years, studying hundreds of documented cases of near-death experiences, I discovered consistent patterns that appear in all cultures, in all eras, in people who never had contact with each other. Let me tell you something I never told publicly. In 1942, I went through an experience that completely changed my relationship with death. I was sick, with high fever that lasted for days. On the 3rd day, something happened. He made a long pause. The young man waited in absolute silence. I left my body, not dramatically as they describe in movies. It was subtle, natural. Suddenly, I was observing my body lying in the hospital bed. I saw the nurses coming and going. I saw my wife sitting in the chair beside me, with her head down, praying. I could hear her thoughts, feel the despair she was trying to hide, and I was perfectly conscious, more conscious than I had ever been in my entire life. There was no pain, no fear, just an incredible clarity. I realized I could move without moving, think without effort, exist without the weight of the body. And at that moment I understood. The body is a temporary vehicle. The consciousness that inhabits it is much vaster, much older, much freer than any matter. And here's what marked me most deeply. When I returned to the body, when the fever subsided and I woke up in that bed, I remembered details of the conversation between the doctors that happened in the hallway while I was unconscious. Details I had no way of knowing. I confronted the doctors later, and they confirmed word for word. That frightened me as much as my own discoveries about the universe. And it was from there that I began my silent investigation. I collected reports, I interviewed people, I documented cases. All in secret, because I knew the scientific world wasn't ready to accept this. The young philosopher wrote, with silent tears in his eyes. They weren't tears of sadness. They were of recognition, as if something deep within him knew this was true. And do you know how many people report similar experiences? Based on serious research done over decades, it's estimated that between 10 to 20% of people who go through cardiac arrest and are resuscitated bring memories of consciousness outside the body. This represents thousands of documented, studied, investigated cases, and the patterns are frighteningly consistent. But here's what few understand. It's not enough to know that consciousness continues. It's necessary to comprehend where it goes, how it transforms, what determines its journey, because it's not automatic. It's not the same for everyone. And this brings me to the second fundamental truth. Wait, go back 15 seconds and listen again to what I just said about it's not the same for everyone, because there's a layer here you probably missed. Death is not democratic. Each consciousness experiences a reality proportional to its vibration during life. What do you mean by vibration? And here's the second layer that changes everything. Everything in the universe is energy at different frequencies. From subatomic particles to galaxies, everything vibrates. This isn't abstract metaphysics, it's quantum physics. And consciousness also vibrates. What you think, what you feel, how you live, All of this generates a specific frequency. Love, compassion, gratitude, these are high frequencies. Fear, hatred, greed, these are low frequencies. And when serious researchers dedicated entire careers to studying expanded states of consciousness, they discovered something fascinating. The quality of conscious experience changes dramatically depending on the frequency at which you operate. Write this down now, or pause the video. When the body dies, consciousness doesn't go to a physical place. It resonates at the frequency it cultivated during life. Let this phrase penetrate completely, because this phrase alone, if you allow it to truly enter your system, can transform the entire way you live from here forward. It's like when you tune a radio. If you're on frequency 89.5, you'll pick up the station transmitting on that frequency. You won't hear station 93.7, not because it doesn't exist, but because you're not tuned to it. This is the second truth. The young man leaned forward, completely absorbed. So hell and heaven aren't places, they're states of consciousness. Exactly, and more than that, they're self-posed. Nobody judges you when you die. You see yourself clearly for the first time, without masks, without lies, and this clarity can be liberating, or it can be terrifying, depending on how you lived. If this is seeming too abstract now, that's exactly what you should be feeling at this point. It's normal for concepts like this to challenge everything you believe, but stay with me, because in the next few minutes this will become crystal clear. A consciousness that lived in denial, that deliberately hurt others, that chose cruelty, it doesn't ascend easily. It remains trapped in the denser layers of reality. It repeats patterns, relives choices, suffers not because God punishes it, but because it itself refuses to let go. Studies with thousands of reports of near-death experiences show that people who lived in destructive patterns describe states of confusion, darkness and isolation after clinical death. But a consciousness that lived, seeking truth, practicing compassion, cultivating genuine love, it rises naturally, not because it's special, but because it vibrates at a frequency that resonates with the subtler layers of existence. In these cases, the reports speak of light, clarity, deep connection, indescribable peace. The fireplace crackled louder for an instant, as if the conversation had awakened something invisible in the room. Einstein rose again and placed another log on the fire. You know what's the biggest mistake religions made? They turned this into a question of reward and punishment. But it's not about that. It's about resonance. It's about how a drop of water returns to the ocean. Imagine you're a drop in the ocean. While you're separated, you have your own identity. You have form. You have direction. But when you fall back into the ocean, what happens? It mixes, said the young man. Yes, but it doesn't disappear. The water of that drop continues to exist. It's just no longer isolated. And here's the deep mystery. When individual consciousness returns to the universal field of consciousness, it somehow maintains the essence of its experience, but without the sense of separation. It's like a wave that returns to the sea. The wave ceases to exist as a wave, but the memory of its movement remains registered in the ocean. You might be wondering now, and who guarantees this isn't just wishful thinking, positive thinking to deal with the fear of death? And here's what few realize. If it were just wishful thinking, the reports would vary completely from culture to culture, from era to era, but they don't vary. The patterns are too consistent to be coincidence. Does this mean that our memories, our experiences, none of this is lost? Nothing is lost. Everything is registered in what some call the Akashic field, others the collective unconscious, others the quantum matrix. The name doesn't matter. What matters is understanding that there's a universal memory where each thought, each emotion, each action is recorded, and you can access this. You've already accessed it, actually, but not consciously. When you have a deep intuition about something you never studied, when you recognize someone you just met as if they were an old friend, when you have a dream that later reveals itself to be prophetic, you're accessing this field. Write this down now or pause mentally to absorb. Consciousness is not local. It's not trapped in your skull. It permeates everything, and you are just a temporary access point to something infinitely greater. Let this idea penetrate completely, because if you really absorb this, everything changes. Your relationship with death changes. Your fear disappears. Your urgency to live fully grows, because you realize that each moment is simultaneously unique and eternal. The young man closed his eyes again, feeling the weight and lightness of those words at the same time. If you didn't fully grasp what I explained a few minutes ago about vibration and frequency, go back there now, remember. Because everything that comes next builds upon this foundation. When he opened his eyes, Einstein was observing the snow through the window. His silhouette against the faint light seemed almost ethereal. There's something else I need to tell you, and perhaps it's the hardest part to accept. Reincarnation is not myth nor belief. It's a natural process, but it's not mandatory. It's a choice. And this brings me to the third fundamental truth I promised to reveal. The philosopher's eyes widened. Choice, yes. When consciousness frees itself from the body, there's a period of integration, of understanding, of life review. Some call this bardo, others purgatory, but it's neither punishment nor waiting. It's processing. In this state, consciousness clearly sees what it learned and what it still needs to learn. And then comes the choice. It can return for a new incarnation. It can remain in intermediate states, helping other consciousnesses, or it can ascend completely if it has already completed its cycle of learning. And we now arrive at the final turn that connects everything we've talked about up to here. Because the question everyone asks is, why would anyone choose to return? Because there are lessons that can only be learned in matter. There are experiences that require body, emotions, limitations. True love, for example, can only be fully understood when you're vulnerable, when you can lose, when you feel in your chest the pain of separation and even so choose to love. Real compassion only arises when you suffer and, even suffering, you can feel for the suffering of others. These are alchemies of the soul that require flesh, blood, real tears. Einstein returned to the armchair. His face now showed deep fatigue, but his eyes still shone. I've already studied hundreds of documented cases of children who remember past lives with impossible details. Children who never left their villages but describe with perfection places thousands of kilometers away. Who speak languages they never learned. Who recognize people they never saw in this life. I investigated these cases with all the scientific skepticism I possess. I looked for alternative explanations. Fraud, coincidence, implanted memory. But some cases simply cannot be refuted. The only logical explanation is that consciousness carries memories across lives. And here's something that will surprise you. The more a consciousness evolves, the less it needs to reincarnate, because it has already learned the fundamental lessons. It already transcends the basic patterns of survival, ego, accumulation. It has already awakened to unity. But when a highly evolved consciousness chooses to return, it's not out of its own necessity. It's out of compassion. These are the great masters, the true spiritual teachers who came not to learn, but to remind others of who they really are. How to recognize these souls? By the absence of ego, by the presence of unconditional love, by the capacity to see unity where others see separation. They don't need to prove anything. They don't seek followers. They don't accumulate power. They live in silent service, illuminating without fanfare. The young man stopped writing and just looked at Einstein. There was a question burning inside him, but he was afraid to ask it. Einstein smiled as if reading his thoughts. You want to know if I believe this is my last life? The young man just nodded. I don't know for certain, but I feel it is. I feel that what I came to do here is complete. I dedicated this life to unraveling the mysteries of the physical universe. Now, in my final months, what interests me is the mystery of consciousness. And perhaps this is the true physics, the physics of the soul. If I return, it will be because there's still something to be understood. But if I don't return, I'll be at peace. Because true freedom isn't to stop existing. It's to stop needing to exist in a separate form. This is the third truth I want you to take from here. The room fell silent for almost a full minute. Just the fire, the breathing, and that invisible presence that now seemed to fill all the space. Then Einstein broke the silence. But there's something more the world needs to understand, and that's rarely said. Death is not the only enemy. Unconsciousness is. Explain that better. You can live 80 years and die without ever having really lived. You can spend decades on autopilot, repeating patterns, obeying conditionings, without ever questioning who you really are. That's the true death. Dying without having awakened. Physical death is not tragedy. Tragedy is living unconsciously. It's wasting this incredible opportunity that is being incarnated, having a body that feels, a mind that thinks, a heart that can love. The greatest gift is not to live forever. It's to be completely present while you're alive. Because when you live like this, with full attention, with awakened consciousness, each moment becomes eternal. You're already experiencing immortality. The young man felt a shiver run down his spine. Einstein continued, "People fear death, but the real fear is of not having lived. That's why, in the final moments, what torments people isn't the mistakes they made. It's the chances they didn't take, the words they didn't say, the love they didn't express, the truths they didn't have the courage to live. So, if I could give you one piece of advice, it would be this: live as if each day were simultaneously the first and the last. With the curiosity of someone discovering the world, and with the urgency of someone who knows time is precious. Love without reservations. Forgive quickly. Speak your truth. Always choose compassion instead of judgment. Because when your time comes to release this body, you're not going to ask yourself how much money you accumulated or how many titles you conquered. You're going to ask yourself how much love circulated through you. Write this down now. Love is the only thing that crosses death. Because love is not emotion. It's the very essence of consciousness. It's the glue that holds the universe together. It's what you really are when all false layers are removed. Let this phrase penetrate, because this phrase alone can transform the rest of your life. The fire in the fireplace was almost out. Einstein made no move to feed it again. The room began to cool, but neither of them seemed to notice. You asked me at the beginning if I believe there's something after death. Now you can understand my answer. I don't believe. I know. Not because I read it in sacred books, or because some guru told me. I know because I experienced it, because the logic of physics itself points to this, because every fiber of my being recognizes this truth. Consciousness is not born, doesn't die. It simply is, eternal, infinite, indivisible. And you are not a body that possesses consciousness. You are consciousness that is temporarily experiencing a body. When the body ceases, consciousness remains. But how it remains, in what state, at what frequency, this depends entirely on how you lived, what you cultivated, the vibration you sustained. Remember that phrase I asked you to keep at the beginning, at minute 6, about death not being democratic. Now you understand why. Each person creates their own post-death experience through the choices they make while alive. Go back there, listen again. Now that you have all the context, it will echo in a completely different way, almost disturbingly clear. If you live in fear, in anger, in separation, your consciousness after death will remain in those states until it processes and releases those frequencies. It can take what we perceive as a very long time, although time doesn't exist there in the same way. But if you live in love, in truth, in unity, your transition will be smooth, natural, like falling asleep and waking up at home. You simply return to the source with full consciousness, carrying all the wisdom you accumulated. And here's the final mystery. When you reach this state of full consciousness, you realize something surprising. You were never separated. The entire journey, all the lives, all the sufferings, all the joys, everything was universal consciousness experiencing itself through infinite points of view. You're not just a drop returning to the ocean. You've always been the entire ocean, just pretending to be a drop so you could experience the journey of return. The young philosopher put down the pen. His hands were trembling, not from cold, but from something greater, from deep recognition, as if every cell of his body were remembering something it had always known but had forgotten. If you're feeling a mix of hope and skepticism now, perfect. It means you're truly processing. Thousands report this same sensation when they encounter these truths for the first time. Einstein rose for the last time that night. He walked to the window where the snow now fell harder. The flakes danced under the yellowish light of the lamppost, each one unique, each one ephemeral, each one part of the same phenomenon. "Look at the snow," he said softly. "Millions of flakes, each one different, each one with its unique geometry, but all made of the same water, all falling from the same sky, all destined to melt and return to the cycle. We are like these flakes, infinitely unique, temporarily separated, but eternally part of the same whole. And when we melt, when we release the individual form, we don't cease to exist. We just change state." He turned and looked directly into the young man's eyes. "What are you going to do with what you heard here today?" The philosopher thought for a long moment. "I'm going to live differently. I'm going to stop postponing what really matters. I'm going to choose love even when it's difficult. I'm going to forgive, starting with myself." I'm going to live as if each moment was sacred, because now I understand it is. Einstein nodded slowly. Then this conversation was worth it, because knowledge that doesn't transform is just information, but understanding that changes how you live, that's wisdom. Don't share this conversation with everyone. Many aren't ready. Their minds will resist. Their beliefs will defend themselves. But for those who are ready, who are asking the right questions, these words will resonate as truth. And when you find these people, don't try to convince them. Just share what resonated in you. Plant seeds. Some will germinate today, others in 10 years, others perhaps only in the next life. The time of consciousness is not linear. Dawn was beginning to hint at the horizon. A pale, cold light began to compete with the darkness. Einstein walked to the door, signaling that the conversation had come to an end. Before you go, I want you to take this. He handed the young man a small book with a worn leather cover. Inside were handwritten notes, equations mixed with philosophical reflections, drawings of sacred geometries beside quantum physics formulas. These are reflections I never published, because the Academy isn't ready, but you are. Use them wisely. Let them guide not just your intellect, but your heart. The two embraced. It wasn't a formal goodbye embrace. It was the embrace of two souls who recognized each other beyond time, beyond form. When the young man crossed the door and stepped on the fresh snow, he felt as if he were entering a new world. The streets were the same, the houses were the same, but something fundamental had changed, not in the world, in him. He walked slowly through the empty streets of Princeton as the sun began to rise. His steps left marks on the virgin snow, and he thought that this was life. We leave temporary marks on a surface that will soon be covered by new snows, new stories, and new walkers. But the marks that really matter, those don't stay in the snow. They stay in consciousness. And those, yes, are eternal. If this conversation touched something deep in you, if these three fundamental truths resonated within you, write awakening in the comments. And when you write that word, observe what happens inside you. Feel something changing. Because when you name the awakening, you allow it to anchor in your consciousness. You're not just commenting, you're declaring that you're ready to see beyond the veil. Months later, he learned that Einstein had passed. And when he received the news, he didn't feel sadness. He felt gratitude, because he knew that man hadn't died, just changed frequency, just returning to the source. Or perhaps, chosen to stay close to continue guiding those who asked the right questions. And whenever the young man, now no longer so young, felt lost or afraid, he would close his eyes and remember the falling snow, the crackling fire, that serene voice saying, consciousness doesn't die, it just transforms, and love is what crosses all transformations. Years passed, decades passed. The young philosopher became a professor. He had students. He wrote books. He lived a life dedicated to exploring the mysteries of existence. But he never published that conversation. He kept it as a sacred treasure, sharing only with those few who demonstrated being truly ready. Until one day, already old, sitting in his own armchair before his own fireplace, he received a visit from a young philosophy student. She had that gleam in her eyes, that hunger for truth that isn't satisfied with superficial answers. And she asked the question, "Professor, do you believe there's something after death?" The old professor smiled. It was the same smile Einstein had given him decades ago. And then he said, "Let's talk. But first I need to tell you, the question is already wrong from the start." And so knowledge perpetuates itself, not through books nor institutions, but through deep conversations between souls who recognize truth when they hear it. Conversations that happen when the right person asks the right question to the right person at the right time. Because in the end, nothing is lost. All wisdom is registered in the universal field of consciousness, and when you're ready, it finds you. Not because you sought it, but because you became the type of person capable of receiving it. Death is not the end of the journey, it's just the turning of a page. And the book is infinite, with chapters written in invisible ink that only reveal themselves when you're ready to read them. You made it this far, and that already says something about you. You're part of the rare 3% who have patience for such a long journey, for such deep reflections. Not because you're special, but because you're awake enough to seek answers beyond the convenient surfaces that 97% of people accept without questioning. If something in this conversation resonated deeply in you, don't let that resonance die. Let it transform you. Let it change how you live, how you love, how you face your fears. And if you know someone who's struggling with the fear of death, who's going through loss, who's questioning the meaning of everything, share this reflection with that person, not as absolute truth, but as possibility, as seed. You could be the instrument to deliver the right message at the right time to someone who really needs it. Subscribe to this channel and activate the bell, because here we don't make content for passive entertainment. We make content for those who are really seeking, for those who want to go deep, for those who aren't afraid to question everything. And here's something crucial that can exponentially multiply the impact of this on your life. Save this video now and mark on your calendar to come back exactly 7 days from now. You're going to notice entire layers of meaning, insights and connections that pass completely unnoticed the first time. That's how deep truths about consciousness and death work. They unfold in successive layers as you're ready to receive them. And if you want to continue exploring these territories where science meets philosophy, where mystery meets reason, click on the next video that will appear here on the screen. There I reveal how 3 thinkers who never knew each other reached the same conclusion about the nature of reality, and what they discovered can completely change your way of seeing the world. The moment to start living consciously is not tomorrow, it's now. Because each day that passes reinforcing the same unconscious patterns makes it harder to awaken. Not impossible, but harder. Life is not a straight line from birth to death. It's a circle, it's a spiral. It's a constant movement of expansion and return, of forgetting and remembering, of separation and union. And you're not here by chance. It doesn't matter what brought you to this video, whether it was algorithm, whether it was someone's recommendation, whether it was pure curiosity. There's a greater intelligence operating behind the apparent coincidences. You're here because a part of you, perhaps a part you didn't even know existed, is ready to remember, ready to awaken, ready to see beyond the veil of illusion we call ordinary life. Death is not your enemy. It never was. The real enemy is living without realizing that you're already what you seek, that you're already eternal, that you're already free. You just temporarily forgot so you could play this game called human existence. But the game is reaching a critical point. Humanity is at a crossroads. And each person who awakens, each consciousness that remembers, each heart that chooses love instead of fear, this makes a difference, not just for you, but for the entire field, because we're not separated. This is the fundamental illusion that sustains all suffering. When you heal something in you, you heal it in the collective field. When you rise, you help everyone rise. When you choose consciousness, you strengthen consciousness in everyone. This is not just a conversation about death. It's a call to awaken while you're still alive. Because living awake, even for one day, is worth more than living 100 years asleep. Thank you for making it this far, for dedicating this precious time not to distractions, but to deep reflections. This shows you're on the path, that you're part of the solution, not the problem. Keep seeking, keep questioning, keep choosing love. And when your time comes to release this body, you'll do it with a smile, because you'll know you're not going anywhere. You're just going home. Until the next awakening,